Okay, we have made it to Kenmare, and I'm delighted to say that Mickey Ned O'Sullivan has welcomed us into his home. Mickey, it's great to see you. How are you keeping?
Excellent, excellent. Looking forward to Sunday, and hopefully we'll have the right result.
Yeah, I decided to give you a shout and to come down to Kenmare because Kenmare is really on vogue right now. Not that you need any reminding about Sean O'Shea or Stephen O'Brien and even the Temple No lads, your neighbours here, but it really feels that the club and the clubs around this area are on a high right now, especially after Shawnee's kick the last day.
Yes, there's great excitement and euphoria building, and you have actually 7 guys in the panel at the moment from the district, which is unprecedented. And it's a great reflection of the clubs, Temple and Kenmare, and even Kilgarvan, and to assist. And you see, it's a great reflection of all the work that has been done at underage in the clubs. And as the players grew up, they went to Public School in Inverskeena. All the players went there, and they came under the tutelage of Tom Connor, who has a very interesting role model for people all over the country. He took over the team when he was 70. He had retired in the hotel business, and he spent the last 10 or 12 years, and he's in his 80s now, and he's still organising the football in the Public School in Inverskeena. So a great role model for everybody around the country, never throwing the towel.
Absolutely. It's amazing, isn't it, how the schools sort of give a huge kick to certain areas, like whether it's out in Dingle under Fitzmaurice, and the SEM obviously down through the years has been such a big factor. So this isn't necessarily two rival parishes coming side to side. They are, of course, that when they're on the club pitch. I think these lads would have been friends growing up and very close already.
Yes, they all play together. They all grew up together. In fact, also, not to mention, there's Julie O'Sullivan, who's also went to the school. She's playing for the Kerry ladies in the All-Ireland the following week, which is a great reflection on the culture of the school as well.
How does it differ from the Kenmare that you grew up in terms of the football prowess of the area?
Well, at that, you see, it's probably, when I was growing up, Timplenoe, Kenmare, Kilgarvan, to assist, were all the one team in the county championship. But because they are now a victim of their success, Timplenoe have become a senior team, Kenmare has become a senior team. I've no doubt about it, they'd be winning county championships had this not happened, if they were both still playing together.
Right.
So it's a plus for the clubs, it's a minus for the district.
Okay. So what has changed then in terms of the individual greatness of all these teams? Like you mentioned the school already. Are there other factors at play in this area?
I think that the good leadership in the clubs, excellent people involved at all levels, at underage level up to senior level, and they have nurtured and developed the players and their skills and their prowess. So it's leadership from the bottom up rather than the top down.
Am I right in saying as well that around the time you would have been an underage player, hurling would have been a bit more of an influence as well in this area?
Yes. I grew up playing probably more hurling than football, and until I became minor underage, then we kind of had to concentrate on the football. But traditionally, hurling was the dominant game in the area. But now, obviously, over the last 30 or 40 years, football has taken a priority, but hurling's still strong.
So where is it, like the Kenmare people are dual players? Is there a divide when you get to a certain point, or who are the hurling folk in this area?
No, and I'm involved with the club senior football team. There are 8 or 9 of the footballers involved in the hurling team. So it's a dual club. Makes it difficult for both hurling and football, but you have to, that is the right of players. They have the right to play both games, and you must respect that.
It's interesting, isn't it? Because you often see people from this part of the county on the county hurling team, and it's like this little oasis of hurling that exists nowhere near North Kerry. So,
Yes.
so what's the historic reasoning for that? Do you
I
know?
suppose traditionally Kilgarvan and Kenmare were hurling strongholds. They have all, going back 130 years, hurling was the dominant game, and it was tradition. And they had won more county championships in hurling than football. So football, I suppose that the big factor I can remember is there was a guard stationed to Kenmare. He was an Offaly man called P.J. McIntyre in the 60s. And he was into football. And he started all the youngsters around playing underage, coached them, kept the pressure on them, and gradually all these lads came together and won a county championship in 1974, and that was really the beginning.
Okay.
And it has obviously grown since.
From your own perspective, then, I guess it would have always been very hard to turn your back on football after the underage success that you mentioned there, and just getting onto the senior panel with Kerry at such a young age. What I'm really interested in is those early years with the Kerry panel when you would have gone in there and you would have seen the two great Micks, Mick O'Dwyer, Mick O'Connell, right at the end of their playing days. What was that experience like as a young fella who I'm sure acutely recognised the greatness of the two men you shared a dressing room with?
It was a great privilege. I joined the panel when I was 18, and for the first 2 or 3 years, they were still on the team, and you respected them. You stood back, you admired them, you learned from them, and it was a great privilege to be on the same team as Mick O'Connell or Mick O'Dwyer. And then it was a transition stage. They were coming to the end of their career, all that age group, and then our group were gradually coming in. But contrary to what people think, we lost championship for 4 years before we won in 1975. And it's very similar to, I remember me discussing this with Johnny Shea recently. I said, it was very beginning of the year, it was a bit down. He says, look, I'm in there 5 years and I've won nothing. I says, that's the learning process. We did the same. Most of us were in there for 4 or 5 years before we won any championship. So, you see, a team goes through a growth stage, a performance stage, and a decline. The growth stage, no team comes overnight. And the growth stage is where you learn from your defeats and you take everything on board, just as Kerry, this present Kerry team has done. They have had agonising defeats, but they've come back, they have learned, they have rectified situations that didn't work out. It was a learning process. And no team develops overnight. Rarely, only the exception. So it takes, what it takes, it's a journey of learning from, you have to learn from your mistakes, from your disappointments, and it improves the resolve. That's why I feel Kerry have had the learning process. They have the growth process. They are now in the performance stage. They haven't been beaten. They conceded 3 goals this year in the championship, and they're now in the performance stage. Whereas Galway are still, hopefully, they're still will be learning from the disappointment on Sunday, because Kerry age structure is about 26. They're at the ideal stage, whereas Galway have probably a wider base of age structure. But I think that Kerry now are in the performance stage. They can continue in that stage for as long as they're hungry. And as long as they keep, hopefully they'll win on Sunday, and they'll look at that, how can we be better, just like the Limerick hurlers.
Yeah.
Limerick have brought this to a fine heart, and they push back the decline. If the hunger, like Dublin did in the football, they extended. They kept the succession planning to perfection. They kept players hungry. They kept players fighting for their positions. Whereas, if you put out the same team again next year after winning, you're on the decline.
Yeah, you need fresh blood, a couple of new faces every
So,
year.
going back to your question about from 70 to 75, that was a transition stage.
You had the lads in decline, really, didn't you? You
Yes.
had the two mixed in decline.
And then you had the younger lads, the Paddy Lynch's, the John O'Keefe's. They were all in the learning, the growth stage.
That's a really interesting contrast between those two generations of players then. What I'm interested in is, from your own memories, how do players like Mick O'Connell deal with the decline stage? You know, knowing all your life that you've been one of the best players in the country, if not ever, and realising that age remains unbeaten.
Yes, I presume he never declined.
He walked away.
He walked away before he declined.
Yeah.
And he probably saw these lads that weren't born when he was playing in the Kerry team, which is a fact.
Yeah.
And then he says, probably it's about time that I took the circus off the road, you know?
You rode off into the sunset.
Yes. And the same with Mick. And they both continued with their clubs.
Are you surprised, sorry, Mickey, that Mick O'Dwyer became the very visible face of Kerry GAA after that, and Mick O'Connell retreated literally to Valencia for a while? Did you always notice that in their characters?
Not necessarily. Mick O'Connell was a perfectionist. And he probably, it was about perfection of the game. I'd say he wasn't interested in management. Mm-hmm. Once he had done it, he had made his mark, and he did other aspects of his life. Mick was involved probably in his club as a trainer, and the natural progression then was he had great leadership qualities, good management skills, and was to progress. They were different personalities.
Yeah, very much so. It certainly seems that way.
Yeah.
What then do you think Mick O'Dwyer saw in you as a teammate and then as a player for him that he thought you'd make a good coach, a good selector?
I don't know. I'd say the reason, because at the time I was doing a degree in physical education in London, and the perception of physical education was fitness. And the obvious thing was, we need some guy at the time. That was the nearest thing to sports science.
You were the cutting edge.
Yeah, and we need to get this guy in because he has been abroad. He has seen how they do it in soccer and rugby. Maybe he might benefit us and bring it to another new level.
Okay. When Mick O'Dwyer departs as Kerry manager, is there this shadow that constantly lingers for people like yourself, for all the managers that managed in the 10 years after, even if you didn't appreciate it at the time? In hindsight, was that the case?
Not necessarily, because you understood it was a transition.
Sure.
And most people would have advised me, don't touch it.
Right.
There's a no-win situation here.
People were telling you that?
Yes. But I felt I was asked to do the job. I will do it to the best of my ability, and I will take them to the next level. And that's what I went in to do. Try and make the transition. We knew that the transition would be slow because I had been involved in the previous management structure. And there was a mistake made. There was no succession planning. And at that stage, I actually left the management team because there was no interest in succession. Because you can understand, Mick's point of view was these lads have given me everything. I'm not going to be dropping them.
Of course.
And we'll play him to the end. And I can see his loyalty. But I could see the picture that succession was vital. Otherwise, we were going to go into a vacuum. And when I went in then, I had to get rid of guys that wanted to stay on and were, in my opinion, on the decline.
Yeah.
And I asked, could I have the under-21s? And I brought in 20 under-21s to the senior panel.
One fell swoop.
Yeah.
Right.
So there was no way you were going to start winning anything, but you had to grow these. So we won the under-21 All-Ireland that year. And we went to the All-Ireland again the following year. And we won the Munster again the following year. So that was the basis of the 97 team. But it was going to be a slow process. I was under no illusions. And in Kerry, the whole thing is you have to win in All-Ireland. I knew that, but I had to have my own targets and goals. Otherwise, I was in a loser for, I was just going to get a lot of stick and not take it. But I had no problem with the stick because I had my own goals.
Yeah.
Taking the players to the next level.
How bad was the stick?
I never felt it.
Right.
There was no social media. There was no... It wasn't the thing that time.
Okay.
It's social media and media. There was very little media at that time. There was maybe 2 or 3 papers. That was it. And you'd get your raps, but that was natural. That went with the role. So you just did your job. What you thought was the right thing, you didn't give a damn what people said, because you felt you were on the right track. And that was it. It's
interesting. We had Darragh O'Cinada on a show a few weeks ago before the Dublin match, and he was saying that he kind of alluded to the fact that Ogie doesn't get anywhere near enough credit for the foundations he laid for Paddy. Like, it does feel that there's Micko, then Paddy, and everybody in between just kind of gets forgotten about as a Kerry manager sometimes.
Same thing will happen to Peter O'Kane.
Yeah.
Peter O'Kane has gone through the growth stage of this team, but Jack will get the benefit. And that's about timing. And Jack is good at timing. And so the same thing, Peter Kane will get Ogie didn't get the credit of building that team. And but that's management. You can achieve anything in management as long as you're not worried who gets the credit.
I was just about to ask that question, actually. Maybe it's not for you then. Maybe do you think in general managers like Ogie are actually okay with that they know themselves what they did, even though nobody's giving them credit?
Yes, that's it. Theodore Roosevelt said that. He says you can achieve anything as long as you're not worried about who gets the credit.
It's a good saying.
And that is the ultimate in, if you have to manage, you manage from the bottom up and you give everybody credit. It isn't about yourself. That's the old-fashioned where it came from the top down. Management now is about developing everybody, management and players to contribute to the common goal. And that's basically, everybody going into management now knows that.
Yeah. Was there a particular moment in modern Gaelic games where you realised that everybody is now thinking that way?
The vast majority of people understand that now, that go into management, that it's about the people you get on the bus, the people that you can't be an expert in every area. You look for what you think the best person in strength and conditioning, the best coach, the best physio, the best psychologist. But not alone that, can we work together? That is very important. Have these people an ability. You see, you can bring in somebody and you don't click with them. That causes, it's like a cancer then in the group. It wears it, it cuts, eats into the effectiveness and to the core and the values. So it's very important that you understand the personality and know the personality of the person you're bringing in, and that you work well together. And there are no egos. Ego is the enemy. And so that's the ultimate, that people are in it for the right reasons. Okay. And they're in it to make their contribution. And basically, if they get credit, so what? But ultimately, they're making their contribution for the overall target or the overall goal.
There's two things I want to ask you about on the back of that, two of your own personal situations. We'll come back to you as Limerick manager and your work with maybe Cian O'Neill in just a moment. But before that, it's the other side of things, you being brought in to a camp. And one of the most fascinating parts of your career, in my opinion anyway, is the South Africans picking up the phone to you all those years ago. For those that have forgotten, what actually happened at that point and how did that come about?
It came about that so the Springboks were worried about their ability to catch the ball.
This was 2005 direction, was it?
Yes, 2005. And they got on to Conor O'Shea. And Conor O'Shea recommended me. And I went out with Jonathan Callard. He was fullback for England, I suppose, in the 90s, and he was the English kicking coach. And they wanted to improve kicking and aerial skills. And both of us went out and we worked in with the 5 Super 12 teams, or Super 14 teams that time, I think. The Blue Bulls, the Cheetahs and these. And we worked with them first, and then Jake White brought us in to work with the Springboks. And it was an interesting concept, because I asked him why, and he said, if, for example, an out half kicks the ball and the winger, he kicks it towards the winger and the winger catches it over his head and down, he says it could be the winning between winning the World Cup and losing the World Cup, just into small details. And the first day I was with them, I couldn't believe how big these guys were and how uncoordinated a lot of them were. So I says to him, how come these guys are so big? And he says, 180 years ago when the Europeans came out here, they went out into the bush, he said, working in agriculture. And he says only the biggest and the strongest survived. And he says the DNA, or the average South African is, he gave me stats, so much heavier and bigger than the average European white.
Right.
So, and that was the reason. But they weren't that coordinated, but they had to work on it,
Okay.
But it was an interesting experience.
So you're doing like high ball drills with them basically,
Yes,
was it?
yes.
Okay.
And it was interesting, the first day I met the team, the Springboks, and they said, Jake White was trying to give a background where I was coming from. And very few of them knew about Gaelic games. So I says, I'll give you 10. I brought the 2005 Tyrone versus Kerry match in a DVD.
Well, could you not have picked a better one, no?
So I said, I'll show you 10 minutes of the game that I'm involved in. So they sat back anyway, and after the 10 minutes, we want to watch it all. So, and then they
You turned it off before Canavan's goal, obviously.
And they couldn't believe that there was 80,000 people and these guys weren't being paid.
Yeah.
And they couldn't believe the speed and how the big thing was how they could exploit space. And they felt that's what they could bring from Gaelic football, breaking the line, creating penetration. And then they asked me to do something on that.
Right.
And but the interesting thing, when I was talking, I spotted this guy. He was one of the coaches, and I recognized him. It was David Campisi.
Okay.
He scored the famous try in '91, I think, in Lansdowne Road against Ireland in the World Cup. Yeah. So I said, there's a guy there knows probably more than I do about high catches from the Aussie rules. And David was a very quiet guy. So I brought him on board with me in the drills and things, because he had actually played Aussie rules as well. So that was an interesting development there. And so, no, it was then Conor got feedback, and Conor asked me would I get involved with the English development squad up in Yorkshire, up in York. And I says, Christ, I can't let anyone in Ireland know that I'm doing this, you see.
And did you do it?
I did, yeah. And I just went over a couple of times into York, I think it was in York. And that was an interesting development as well, and how they were developing. Conor was involved. He was a kind of development officer for the English Rugby Union at the time.
Okay,
yeah.
And obviously still involved with the English
Yes.
Rugby Union at the moment
Yes.
as well.
Yes.
Right, okay. And is that where your rugby coaching career ended?
Well, I had played, the only game I played in when I was in Strawberry Hill was rugby. It was the nearest to Gaelic football.
Okay.
So I had a good experience of rugby over 4 years.
You should say as well, obviously, it was an England-South Africa World Cup final in '07. South Africa got the job done. The Mickey Ned O'Sullivan derby, I didn't realise that's what it was. So you taught Brian Habana how to catch a high ball?
Yes, he was in the team at the time, yes. And he was young, he was only about 19.
Yeah.
But he was very well built and very fast. Yeah.
Very interesting.
Yeah.
Back to the Gaelic games then, and I mentioned that I did want to talk about the other side of things, being the coach who brings people in. When you talk about that growth mindset that exists from a managerial standpoint, everybody's talking about Pádraig Joyce this week and his decision to enhance his own coaching to get with people like Cian O'Neill.
Yes.
I think you were the first person to ever give Cian a chance at inter-county level.
That's right. I'd heard about him, and he was coaching a junior club in Clare at the time, and I rang him and met him and was impressed by him. So he was brought in as a strength and conditioning person, and spent 2 years and had a very positive input into development of these Limerick players at the time. The good mindset, good attitude, good approach. And then he went to Tipperary and moved into more of, I think he was still in the strength and conditioning, but went from there to Mayo and got into the coaching side of things then. And no, it was very good. He was very professional in every way.
Did you see that there was something there, that this guy was very ambitious to succeed?
Very ambitious. And he wasn't going to stay with us.
Okay.
And that was, you could see that he was ambitious.
One last point there on Cian, just about the transition from strength and conditioning into kind of more of a tactical coach. Is that an unusual pathway for a young coach in GAA?
It is, because generally speaking, strength and conditioning people, in the management thing, there isn't a big crossover between the strength and conditioning and the coach. And from a manager's point of view, you give your slot to the strength and conditioning person, and you give the slots to the coaching. But I know there's a lot of interaction as well between both. But generally speaking, strength and conditioning people stay within that area that they're qualified in, and the coaches then are a more broader perspective, because they come from a football point of view. So they wouldn't have the knowledge of the strength and conditioner, and they would stick to usually the football side of things.
Okay, so He's obviously managed to shatter that glass ceiling in some regards.
Yes.
Just a couple of other things, Mickey. Ned, I was looking at the forecast for Sunday. It's going to rain. You know all about playing All-Ireland finals in the wet and the rain. 1975, obviously, it wasn't the best day. Obviously, you can't possibly have memories of that full game after what happened. I'm interested just in that moment. Is that something that you kind of look back at and laugh at? Is it something that you're proud of? I mean, it's such a unique moment in such a big game, and at the same time, it's a terrible, horrific moment for you in that moment.
Well, it just happened, and you accept it. Mm-hmm. The most important thing was the lads went on and won the All-Ireland.
Yeah.
And you don't think about it, these things happen.
Yeah.
You don't have a regret, or you accept it, and you enjoyed the few minutes you were there, and you move on.
Yeah.
It just, that was part of the game. And the interesting thing about it, the person who was reputed to have knocked me out has become a very good friend. Because every time we go to Dublin, we'll give a ring, or any time he's down, we touch base, we might have a drink or a meal. And it led to a great friendship. And we have never discussed that situation.
Yeah.
It's interesting.
You've never talked about it?
No.
Who is it?
Sean Doherty.
It is Sean Doherty.
Yeah.
Right, yeah.
And we've what goes on the field, you leave it on the field and you move on. And you have a lot more in common than you don't have.
Yeah.
And football is about, it's not about, it's a journey, and it's about the people you meet, and you have so much in common, and you have kept, because you have a similar, we'll say, gone through a similar pathway, you have a lot in common, and those friendships blossom outside of the football field. Mm-hmm. So it's you leave everything. What goes on the field stays on the field, you know.
It's a good way to be. Were you going to pass the ball, or were you going to go for goal?
I haven't a clue. But I've seen once or twice, I saw it, and I think I could have passed it. I think Hoagie was running alongside me, and I was probably obsessed with scoring a goal, and didn't. I should have passed the ball, but that's life.
Did you pass the ball more after that moment?
No, I don't think so. Didn't learn my lesson. So that's basically. I don't remember an awful lot more about that game.
No, but it is one of the more iconic moments of an All-Ireland and an All-Ireland in the rain in particular. Yeah. Just to fast forward then to 2022, then you mentioned there talking to Sean O'Shea a few weeks ago, or at the start of the season, I should say. How proud were you to see him kick that kick? I mean, every Kerry person probably got a sense of pride, but just given the fact that you know the man, given the fact that he is your neighbour.
I was 100% sure he was going to kick it right over the bar. Because any time I go to the football field, he has 15 balls in the middle of the day, and he's practicing. His mental resolve is phenomenal. Once I saw him put Shane Ryan, didn't allow Shane Ryan to kick the ball. He was a captain. He took responsibility. I knew he was going to score. Because, you know, he has such a discipline, a self-discipline that he has worked on over the years. And he doesn't say much, but he leads by example, and he demands a very high standard of himself. Mm-hmm. And he's a perfectionist in terms of kicking, his ability to kick frees. Mm-hmm. He works. He's a great role model, both on and off the field. And I couldn't speak highly enough of him as a person and as a leader. He's a I don't know, are they born leaders? I think leadership is learned, but he certainly has learned it.
Okay. Did people in Kenmare always know he was going to be this good?
Up to about 16 years of age, you didn't. But then he began to develop. He developed his game, but he developed physically as well, and he's developed himself enormously from a physical point of view, because he wasn't structurally that strong. But I'm telling you, you wouldn't want to hit in against him now.
Yeah, that's for sure.
Yeah.
He said on our show a few years ago that he took a year out after the Leaving Cert, because he did it when he was 16, and he was working for the family business, which allowed him to become a professional minor footballer, I think was his phrase. So it's that work ethic you speak to, and that year in particular, I think that made a big difference.
Yes, and I suppose we're very fortunate in Kenmare now that he's got a job in the local public school.
He's working back here now, is he, right?
He's teaching.
Okay, I thought so he used to be teaching in Cork, obviously.
He was just doing his dip. He's in Coláiste I think he was, but he's full time now in Kenmare, which is great, and all the students you look up to him, you know, because he's a great leader and he's a good teacher as well, you know.
And is that is chairman of the club, is he?
He was chairman. But his 5 years was up, but he's still running the club, you know. He's exceptionally. His dad played with Kerry Minor as well, centre back. I don't know what year now, but I get mixed. As you get older, you can't pick out the years. No, he lives football, you know.
Yeah. And
that's what's required. And you have to eat and sleep it. And he certainly does it, you know, and he leads by example. And he doesn't say much, but he leads. What he says is worth listening to.
100%.
Yeah.
Are Kerry going to win on Sunday?
I would think so. But then again, you have to be careful. Anything can happen in the heat of battle. But I think that the stage, as I already mentioned, that Kerry are at, they're in the performance stage, whereas I still think Galway are in the growth stage. And I think that gives the tips the balance in Kerry's. I think it's going to be low scoring first half. I think Galway will close down all the channels, and maybe after 45 minutes it will open up. And I think then Kerry will finish stronger.
Okay.
You know?
Very good. Mickey, Ned, it's been an absolute pleasure chatting to you. Thanks a million for being so generous with your time. And hopefully it's another great day for Kenmare and the Kenmare district as a whole on Sunday.
Hopefully, looking forward to it.